paid workers and volunteers started soup kitchens, food pantries, and now one of the country's biggest charities, America's Second Harvest. The nation's food bank network, in response to a fraying federal safety net, with lines of hungry people snaking around the block, the emergency food movement was born. Churches and private social service agencies in Hartford were scrambling to feed the rapidly growing number of hungry people. Food pantries and soup kitchens were springing up throughout the city, as they were in cities across the nation. But even in the first rush of excitement that comes when people rise as a team to confront a tough task, most people felt that they were not even coming close to filling the need. Mark Patton, who started the first food bank in the state, summed up the zeitgeist of the moment when he said, "We are playing into Reagan's hands by increasing private feeding activity, while the federal government is doing all it can to shirk its responsibility. This patchwork system is an inadequate and terribly inefficient way to try to keep people from starving. But at the moment, we have no choice." Little did he or anyone else in the ragtag emergency food movement know that this was just the beginning of what was to become a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar network. More important, the organizers, who honestly believed that their actions were a temporary response necessitated by a true emergency, could not have foreseen that their work would permanently alter the way the general public and government at all levels would address the food gap. When this first happened in Hartford, we had actually about 4 places in the city where people could get emergency food. And these were mostly your old-line mission organizations, like the Salvation Army and some settlement houses that had been around for 100 years or more. Today in Hartford, we have over 400 places where you can get emergency food. Across the country, there's over 50,000 food pantries, soup kitchens, and other places where people can get food assistance from private charity. I asked the question, is this the way that our nation should be going? Should we be addressing the problem in this way? This didn't exist in the early 1980s, but in less than 30 years, we have this enormous emergency food system, which is not, unfortunately, solving the problem. It's keeping people from starving to death, yes. It's working to fill the gaps left by a food stamp program that is inadequate, and other federal programs that always come up just a little bit short. But it has become a very dominant institution in our country. When I ask people, when I speak, what percentage of food in your community comes from the public sector? In other words, food from food stamps, school meal programs, WIC, and other federally funded programs. And what percentage comes from the private sector, from private charities? Think about it for a moment. What percentage will be the relative percentage of those, public versus private? Most times when I ask that question, people say about 80% of the food is coming from the private sector and about 20% from the public sector. 80% private, 20% public. Well, in fact, the real number is about 95% public and about 5% private. This seems to suggest that Americans see the private charity system of food distribution as being the largest and the most dominant. Now, I wrote an essay that appeared in the Washington Post just before Thanksgiving this past year, and I basically raised these questions. I said, I'm not sure that we should continue to grow our emergency food system. I'm not sure that we should keep on doing this the way we're doing it, because we're really not making anything better. And unfortunately, we're also distracting many of the public and our policymakers from the real cause of hunger, which is poverty. And we've let our anti-poverty programs slip, and our federal food assistance programs are barely adequate, and we keep looking to the food banking world as a way to try to make up the difference. And I think it's time to pause and to reassess what we're doing, and to, at the very least, ask questions, have debates about what is the cause of this problem that we're having, namely hunger and food insecurity, and what is the best way to actually end it. Because what we do, unfortunately, is manage poverty by making food assistance programs available. We never get to the root cause. Well, as you can imagine, an essay like that, just before Thanksgiving, stirred up a bit of a hornet's nest. According to the Washington Post, my article, my essay, which is on the front page of their commentary section on Sunday, got 86,000 hits on their website within 3 days, just the first 3 days of its appearing. The article also appeared in about 25 other daily newspapers and was picked up by countless blogs. And it was really interesting, the response and the feedback I got. I would say that 2/3 of the people actually agreed with my position for the most part. There were about 20% who agreed with my position, but they didn't think the government should be involved at all and we should, basically screw the poor. That was their position. The rest, a very small minority, felt that I was, I was wrong, that we, in fact, some even blamed me for food shortages at food banks as a result of my comments. But to me, it suggested that there was a strong amount of feeling about this subject. In fact, people began to rethink the amount of sort of energy that they put into the emergency food system and whether or not that was the best way to proceed. So I raised these questions in my book. I think it's time for us to think about it again. I think it's, so many times I've heard us, dismiss anti-poverty programs, dismiss the work that was done by the Kennedy administration, the Johnson administration, the Great Society. Oftentimes I bring up those names and people smirk or they laugh. And I'm not even sure they know why they're smirking or they're laughing, other than to believe that government simply doesn't have a role. Well, I think that government does have a role. I do know that we could probably eliminate hunger and food insecurity in this country if we increase the food stamp program by 50% a year. That would be about $18 billion more for the food stamp program than we spend now, which coincidentally is about what we spend on the Iraq war for about 2 months. So we don't have our priorities straight. And I think that it's time that we continue to support our emergency food efforts because they are essential, but at the same time we have to engage others, and particularly policymakers, to get to the root cause. Now, that being said, there was another sort of side to the food movement, which I'm going to kind of close with here. As you all kind of indicated by the show of hands, many of you participate. Most of you participate in probably supporting farmers markets or gardens or CSAs. I saw a wonderful brochure of all the CSAs around here, the community-supported agriculture, where people buy a share in the farm and get a share of the harvest all season long. And again, wonderful movements, wonderful projects, so many variations, so much creativity, so much innovation. So good to see the community come together with farmers and make a difference. But again, we saw that it was the poor people kind of at the back of the line, not participating, not able to afford that $400 or $500 upfront payment to join the CSA. So when that movement first took off in the early 90s, we in Connecticut decided that it was a good thing. But again, like farmers markets, we wanted everybody to participate. We didn't want CSAs to be only for one class of people who were essentially white, light, and bright. We wanted everyone of all incomes and all colors to be present and participating in our CSA, if they wanted to. So this is how we went about doing it. I'm going to read, this will be my last little reading here, just to kind of tell you a story of why I think that the good food movement, organic food movement, the local food movement is something that we should all be participating in. The 14-year-old Holcomb Farm CSA, located in Granby, Connecticut, about 30 minutes from downtown Hartford. Stop by on a September morning and you'll see overflowing crates of just picked organic produce, stacked high and deep in the farm's distribution room. The wooden shelves in the farm's converted tobacco barn strain under the weight of collard greens, the season's first winter squash, and at least 6 varieties of tomatoes, some so large you could barely balance one in your hand. The farm's manager, Sam Hammer, whose dramatic name is matched only by his imposing 6-foot 4-inch frame, rolls open the barn doors to a small crowd of waiting CSA shareholders. Within seconds, they are milling about the barn, murmuring appreciatively as they eye, caress, and eventually place their produce items reverently into an assortment of cloth and recycled bags. Outside the pickup barn at Holcomb is an adjoining meadow that serves as the farm's temporary parking lot. The shareholders' Volvos, BMWs, and Outbacks sit side by side with several dilapidated vans that bear names such as Community Partners in Action, City of Hartford Housing Authority, and the Hispanic Health Council. They represent the Hartford community organizations that work with the city's low-income households. And like other members of the CSA, they are here to pick up their share of the produce. The diversity of motor vehicles makes a statement that everybody, regardless of race, residency, or income, is entitled to a share of the best and healthiest food the community has to offer. And what the Hartford food system did was to make it possible from grants, donations, even federal contracts that we were able to receive from a variety of funding sources to basically write down the cost of a share for low-income families. And mainly we did it by involving low-income serving organizations like the ones I mentioned. It made it affordable for them to participate. We asked everybody to pay something, but there was a major gap that was made up by the Hartford food system. But we also sold shares to middle and upper income families at what would be considered market rate. So as a result of sort of this kind of mishmash of funding, which included my favorite contribution came from a high school, a wealthy high school, where the students had decided that they were not going to hold the big, slam, bam, wing, ding, senior prom that they traditionally held in the past that cost every one of them thousands of dollars each. They decided they were going to hold a kind of a real low-end prom, you might say. And instead of driving, hiring a limousine and buying the most expensive gown you could get, they, borrowed Dad's car, they recycled the dress, and they donated the difference to our organization as a way to bring down the cost of shares for low-income families. That kind of creativity made it possible for about 40% of our shareholders to come from low-income families. And this actually has become the largest CSA, one of the largest CSAs now in New England. It's up to about 30 acres, about 500 members altogether. So it's a significant contribution to the local and organic food movement, but more importantly, it's a significant contribution to the social justice movement. And one way, I'm going to close it out with this story by one of the member organizations of the CSA who participated. It was actually a facility that is It's a residential facility for HIV/AIDS clients and patients. At Peter's retreat, the CSA shares of collards, tomatoes, and peppers don't go to individual households. They go instead to the facility's communal kitchen, which feeds residents whose lives at society's margins may very well qualify them as refugees in their own country. According to the organization's executive director, there are many illnesses and disease related to HIV that create complications, like diabetes, that can be treated with diet. He says that Holcomb Farms produce gives the chef, Janet Candela, more menu options, and as the residents are introduced to the farm and its food, they take a greater interest in their diets. The director doesn't think that the residents attach any great significance to the food's organic attributes, but he does believe that they make a stronger association between the local farm, its land, and the food they eat. If anything, the food's organic quality is just icing on the cake. Although Candela is a vegetarian, she readily admits that all of her customers are meat and potatoes people. These are folks who are so far off the mark from health, she told me, their days consist of sleeping, taking meds, and eating. So I have to feed them what satisfies them. Rather than trying to force vegetables down their throats, Candela arranges weekly field trips to the CSA for 6 or so residents at a time. At first, these trips were just a way to get out of the city and experience a place that was green. But before too long, the residents began to refer to the half-hour ride to the farm as a trip to paradise. Once there, they pick strawberries, peas, and tomatoes, hang out with the resident dog, or hold the farm's chickens. One day they picked hundreds of stems of cosmos, calendulas, and asters for a staff member's wedding. I never thought I'd see these guys cut and arrange flowers, Candela said. Before too long, Candela didn't have to push vegetables down their throats. The residents were eating them of their own accord, walking on the land that produced their food and helping in small ways with the harvest have inspired them to modify their diets. The farm became central to my cooking, Candela said. It had a huge impact on the residents' diets. She noted that the residents have developed a spirit of living off the land and being tied, perhaps symbolically, to the farm's seasonal cycles. They asked her in the afternoon what vegetables she'll be using for supper. Candela attributes the overall increase in their consumption of produce to the elemental connection between the object and human touch. If you put a pumpkin seed in the ground and grow and pick it yourself, she explained, you'll like it much more than the one you buy at the supermarket. Candela reflected on the impact that she believes the CSA has on her clients, who, in her words, are poor and isolated. They've burned themselves, and they've been burned by society. For them, the farm eliminates the class differences. They mingle freely there with many kinds of people and don't feel out of place. It's a funny thing to say about tough guys from the street, she says, but they feel safe there. And maybe there's something about the environment that promotes feelings of safety, acceptance, and health. The rows of green plants, no pesticides, the clean soil, the clear, babbling brook, caring people, and the land itself practically create a craving for healthy food and even a healthy lifestyle. And I think back on my own sort of starting point, my own youth. I think, gosh, I think I had that same craving. And it didn't come out until later on, until I had an opportunity to get my hands in the soil and learn something about gardening, gain an appreciation for food, good food, by learning how to prepare it myself. And I guess I believe that craving is shared by everybody, regardless of their circumstances. So, again, closing the food gap is how we as communities, as a society, as governments, local, state, federal, can come together and address one big problem we have in this country and can actually solve this problem. Unlike many other problems which may not lend themselves to easy resolutions, I do think that we can, as a nation, close the food gap. So thank you for your attention.